Last summer, I found myself craving something more in life. I was stuck in a soul-sucking office job, feeling isolated and purposeless, so I decided to try volunteering. I came across a community center that offered a variety of programs for the underprivileged and the elderly, and I signed up without giving it too much thought. The first day was unremarkable. I helped serve meals and chatted with a few seniors who seemed grateful for the company. I left feeling somewhat fulfilled but still empty, as if I hadn't really connected with anyone. Weeks passed, and I continued to go back, hoping every time that I would find some sort of epiphany. One particularly dreary day, while organizing donations in the back room, I noticed an unmarked box in the corner covered in dust. My curiosity got the better of me, and when I pried it open, a wave of stale air rushed out, almost like a warning. Inside was an assortment of trinkets, old photos, and what appeared to be a journal with frayed edges. The pages were filled with handwritten notes and sketches that depicted lifelike visions of what seemed to be people's lives and struggles. I flipped through it, but one entry caught my eye: the day I ran away, April 14th. The words felt like a tangible echo of despair, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an ordinary journal. Something compelled me to keep it, so I tucked it under my arm discreetly and slipped out when no one was watching. That night, I read through more of its contents. It chronicled the lives of various individuals connected to the community center over the years, detailing their joys, sorrows, and the pivotal moments that shaped them. But it was the entry about April 14th that truly unnerved me. It described a girl named Emily who had lived in the neighborhood and had mysteriously disappeared one spring day. The account was haunting, detailing her struggles with mental health and the despair she felt in her last days. As I delved deeper into Emily's story, I found myself spending hours lost in each page, piecing together her life much like a puzzle. I couldn't sleep that night. I was determined to uncover what had happened to her. So, the next day, I returned to the community center and asked the staff if they remembered Emily. Their faces fell, and they exchanged glances filled with unspoken grief before finally explaining that Emily had been a bright soul who had fought many demons before vanishing without a trace. They told me she had volunteered at the center, inspiring others with her vibrant stories until one day, she simply didn't come back. I told them I had found her journal and showed them some of the entries. Their eyes widened with a mix of recognition and sorrow. They hadn't seen it in years, and the hope they once had for her return seemed rekindled even if just for a moment. I felt an urgency grow within me, an overwhelming desire to honor Emily's memory and perhaps even find her. I began researching everything I could about her disappearance, pouring through records and old news articles. I met her friends, family, and anyone willing to talk. With every conversation, I learned more about the girl who had touched so many lives, and I realized how intertwined our journeys were. People told me how she had always wanted to help those around her, how she had visions of bettering the community but had ultimately lost faith in that purpose. It was then I found out about a creek on the outskirts of town she once loved visiting, a secluded spot where she often found solace from the chaos of her mind. Feeling drawn to that place, I hiked out there one afternoon, clutching the journal like it was a lifeline. The creek was beautiful, surrounded by tall trees and blooming wildflowers, but an overwhelming sense of emptiness lingered in the air. As I sat on a rock, flipping through the pages of her journal again, I suddenly felt her presence, as if she were somehow there with me. I started to talk to her, sharing what I had learned and how I was trying to keep her spirit alive. I wished I could have told her how loved she still was, how much she mattered. The more I spoke, the more I felt connected to her and her struggles, life becoming a bridge between our two existences. Then something caught my eye. I noticed an unusual glimmer just beneath the water's surface nearby. Heart pounding, I edged closer and reached down, pulling out a small, rusted charm necklace in the shape of an anchor that looked eerily familiar. In fact, it was just like one Emily had drawn repeatedly in her journal. Overcome, I realized I had found a piece of her, a piece of the girl who had been lost yet was somehow guiding me. I rushed back to the community center, filled with a newfound purpose. I decided to host a fundraiser in her honor, something to ensure the community would remember her story and continue her legacy of helping others. With the journal and the necklace as symbols, I gathered people who knew her and those who didn't. On the day of the event, I shared Emily's journey, the ups and downs, and how a community could build each other up in moments of despair. For the first time, I felt connected, not just to her, but to everyone surrounding me. We raised a small fortune that day to fund mental health resources in the community, making sure those who struggled wouldn't feel like they had to fight alone as Emily had. In the end, it wasn't just about finding Emily or uncovering the mystery of her disappearance, it was about giving others the sense of hope she had once inspired. I left the community center that evening feeling fulfilled, purpose coursing through my veins. I had come to give back, to fill a void in my own life, but instead, I found myself intertwined with a past that needed healing. I don't know if I'll ever find the answers to what happened to Emily, but I do know that she found a place in my heart, teaching me that sometimes, just sometimes, volunteering isn't about helping others, it's about discovering who you truly are along the way.
I've been receiving emails from someone who died last year, and it's becoming both a chilling enigma and a haunting obsession that I can't seem to shake. It all started the week after my best friend, Mark, passed away in that tragic car accident, a moment that forever changed my world. We shared everything, from mundane day-to-day chats to our deepest fears and dreams, so when my phone chimed with a notification marked from Mark, I felt that familiar pang of disbelief followed swiftly by dread. Confused and reeling, I clicked on the email, half expecting it to be a cruel prank or perhaps a glitch. But there it was, a simple message that read, "I'm still here." Of course, I thought it was someone else messing with me, but when I scanned through the rest of the emails over the following weeks, they were unmistakably written in Mark's voice, the intricate way he crafted his sentences, the nerdy pop culture references we always tossed around, as if he were still right there on the couch, remoting the latest episode of our favorite show. The messages became more frequent, a new email every few days, updates on his life as if he had merely taken a long vacation instead of dying unexpectedly. "I met someone," he wrote in one, followed by elaborate descriptions of a woman at a bar who he swore looked like someone straight out of a movie, and while part of me was overjoyed for him, a darker side whispered that it was all wrong. Out of sheer desperation and a sense of duty to my late friend, I responded, asking how he could email me from beyond the grave and to clarify if this was a sick joke. Days passed without a reply, and my heart sank further into the pit of despair. The next email arrived on another gloomy Wednesday, this time unsettlingly personal, filled with memories only the two of us shared and unimaginable details about things I had never told anyone, even his parents, moments we'd locked away in the vault of our friendship. It felt too intimate, a ghost weaving through the pixels of my computer screen, and I felt the sanity leave my mind as the thread connecting the real world and whatever was happening began to fray. I started digging into the technical aspects, wondering how it was possible for someone to send a digital message from the grave. After some fool's research and a few sleepless nights, I discovered that if an email account remains logged in, it could be temporarily accessed by certain protocols. The thought struck me like lightning. It could be a trick, but also a somewhat comforting thought that maybe, just maybe, his spirit had learned some tech magic from beyond. Then I noticed the dates. Every new email was sent on the anniversary of some shared moment, memories echoing throughout my mind like taunts from a badly tuned radio. But what shook me to my core was an email that arrived on the night of his funeral. The email simply said, "Don't think about what happened. Just remember the good times." My hands trembled as I read it, and I realized that whoever was sending these emails could not be Mark himself, couldn't possibly know those moments with that level of intimacy unless they had been watching me, lurking in the shadows, impersonating him like a demon wearing a friend's skin. In a panic, I decided to confront whoever was behind the eerie deception. I sent a direct message filled with my rage and fear, demanding that they stop sending me these emails and leave me alone. The reply, however, was swift and cold. "You have to understand, this isn't over. I didn't choose this, I just wanted to see you one last time." Confusion and fear coursed through my veins as I stared blankly at the screen, imagining Mark's face, knowing he wouldn't hurt anyone. I fell down a rabbit hole of searches, looking for any stories of people connecting with the dead through tech as if the digital landscape had become an eerie bridge to the afterlife. Soon after, emails continued, but grim topics surfaced, the descent into a darkness I didn't expect, suggesting I look deeper into his death, asking if I'd considered all angles, offering cryptic clues about others involved, sideways glances toward unexamined secrets. He listed incidents I thought were mere coincidences, leading me to wonder if he had really spoken to me from the other side or if someone was exploiting my grief in the most perverse way possible. Each email felt like an invitation to a scavenger hunt for a truth I didn't want to know, and against my better judgment, I began playing along, piecing together details I never fully understood. Days turned into weeks of restless investigation, leading me to discover hidden secrets about Mark's life, secrets he had never disclosed, implications that surrounded him, and shadows lurking on the edges of our nostalgia. The final email came in with a subject line that sent chills down my spine. It read simply, "Find me." It arrived just as I felt I was inching closer to unveiling the twisted tale that somehow wrapped around Mark's name, and I wasn't sure if it had come from the other side or the hands of a very real predator playing with grief like a cat with a cornered mouse. My heart raced as I hit reply one last time, pleading for clarity and a way to stop this maddening cycle. I was fully aware at that point, at least rationally, that whatever had started with Mark was now far beyond him. After a pause that felt like an eternity, the email pinged with a chilling emptiness. I took a breath to ready my heart for the words, but instead found an attachment, a series of horrifying photos capturing moments I had never lived, twisted reflections of memories not just mine but ones that blazed like uncomfortable dreams. I recognized the events, the faces, they were the days before Mark's death, slipping through the fingers of reality, shaking loose fresh snow on a crooked mountain trail. A surge of dread crashed into me as I frantically searched for answers, trying unsuccessfully to extract meaning from the madness devouring my thoughts as each new revelation pulled me in deeper. I finally shut my laptop that night, a tear streaming down my face as I lamented over what could never be again, trying to make sense of the mess that lay before me. And though I didn't realize it then, I had already opened a door I could never close, and what I thought was simply Mark reaching out was merely bait that would lead me, inevitably, into the abyss. Days later, after failing to block the sender, I received a final message, one that broke the barrier of fear and plunged me into terror. It read, "I'm coming for you." The weight of those words knocked the breath out of me, leaving me petrified, wondering if I'd released something far more sinister than just memories through those emails. And now they were haunting me, a final warning, each keystroke a life stolen as I tormented myself with unanswered questions. Was it too late, and what terrors awaited when the screen finally went dark?
The time I gave advice and it backfired spectacularly. It was supposed to be a simple thing, giving a piece of advice to a friend, something I thought would help them. At the time, I had no idea how badly it would backfire. It all started one Friday afternoon when I met up with my friend Mark at our usual spot, a coffee shop near our office. Mark had been struggling with his relationship for a while. He'd been dating Lisa for nearly a year, and things weren't going great. There was constant tension between them, and he couldn't seem to figure out why. It wasn't that they didn't love each other, it was more like they were two people who had drifted apart but couldn't let go. He had been asking for my advice for weeks, but I'd never been able to offer anything concrete. That day, however, something changed. He sat across from me, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup, looking like a man on the edge. "I don't know what to do, man. I feel like every time I try to talk to Lisa, she shuts me down. I don't even know if I can keep doing this," he said, his voice a mixture of frustration and despair. I could see the desperation in his eyes, and for some reason, I felt compelled to offer him some words of wisdom. I wasn't an expert on relationships, but I'd had my fair share of ups and downs. "Look, man," I said, leaning in, "sometimes in relationships, you have to put yourself first. If you're feeling unhappy, if you're feeling like things aren't working, you need to communicate that. But you also need to take a step back and think about what you truly want. You've got to be honest with yourself and with her." I could see Mark nodding, taking in my words, and for a moment, I thought he was really starting to get it. He looked like he was relieved, like he had finally heard something that made sense to him. That's actually not a bad idea," he said, his face brightening up. "I think I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell her how I feel, and maybe we can work through it." I felt a surge of confidence in that moment. I thought I had helped him. I thought that maybe my advice would be the thing that turned things around for him. The next week, however, things took a drastic turn. I didn't hear from Mark for a few days, and when I finally did, it wasn't at all what I had expected. I got a text message from him that read, "Hey, we need to talk. It's about Lisa." My heart sank. I had no idea what had happened, but I feared the worst. I immediately called him, and after a few rings, he picked up. His voice sounded flat, almost defeated. "Hey, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, though I could feel the anxiety creeping up. "Dude, it's bad. I took your advice. I sat Lisa down, told her exactly how I felt, told her I needed space, that things weren't working, and she just exploded," Mark said, his voice cracking. I sat there in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process what he was saying. "What do you mean?" exploded. I asked cautiously. "She just lost it. Started yelling at me, calling me selfish, saying I didn't care about her." I tried to stay calm, but the more I tried to explain, the worse it got. "She packed up her stuff and left. It's over, man. I don't know what to do." I could hear the pain in his voice, and I felt a lump form in my throat. I had no idea that my advice would have such a devastating impact. I had no idea that telling him to be honest about his feelings would lead to a breakup. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I said, my mind racing. "Maybe you should try talking to her again, explain that you didn't mean to hurt her." "I did." Mark interrupted, frustration creeping into his voice. "I've been calling her nonstop, trying to fix it, but she won't pick up. It's like I don't even exist to her anymore." I was speechless. I didn't know what to say. I felt responsible for the mess that had been made. What was supposed to be a simple piece of advice had spiraled into something far worse. I spent the next few days trying to help Mark fix things, but the situation didn't improve. Lisa wasn't answering his calls or texts, and he was left spiraling deeper into a pit of regret. I tried to console him, but the guilt weighed heavily on me. I had given him advice, and it had destroyed his relationship. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. It felt like everything I had said was wrong, like I had made things worse instead of better. I tried to remind myself that Mark was the one who had ultimately made the decision to confront Lisa, but it didn't feel like that mattered. He was my friend, and I had failed him. Then, one day, a few weeks after the breakup, I received a message from Mark that caught me completely off guard. "Hey, I need to talk to you," the text read. My stomach dropped. Was he going to blame me for everything again? Was he angry with me? I called him immediately, and this time, when he answered, his voice was lighter, almost relieved. "What's going on?" I asked, still bracing myself for the worst. "I know this sounds crazy, but I think I've figured it out," Mark said. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about putting myself first and being honest with what I need. I didn't realize it before, but maybe I've been holding on to something that wasn't meant to be. Lisa and I weren't right for each other, and maybe that's why we were always fighting. I think I needed to hear what you said to finally see it." My heart skipped a beat. "So, what does that mean?" "It means I'm okay. I'm going to be fine. I've started focusing on myself, on what I want. I don't want to get back with Lisa, and I think that's the best thing for both of us," Mark said. "I just wanted to say thanks, man. Your advice. It helped me see the truth." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For a moment, I was relieved, but then, the full scope of it hit me. The advice I had given had set off a chain of events that, at first, seemed catastrophic, but in the end, it had helped Mark come to terms with the reality of his relationship. It wasn't the way I had imagined it would go, but maybe, just maybe, it was what he needed to hear. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had almost ruined his life with a simple piece of advice. It had backfired spectacularly, just not in the way I had expected. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Sometimes, the right advice isn't about offering solutions, it's about giving someone the space to find their own. In the end, I guess I had played a part in his growth. But it will forever be a reminder that giving advice is a double-edged sword.
It started with giggles echoing from my daughter's room, light and airy, as if she were caught in a dream, but the vivid laughter seemed too raw, too alive to be anything other than real. Emily had never had any imaginary friends, she was always too busy reading or playing by herself, so when she bounded down the stairs one evening, her cheeks flushed with excitement, I couldn't help but smile as she declared, "Daddy, I have a new friend." I leaned against the kitchen counter, intrigued yet cautious, and asked about this friend. "His name is Sam," she chirped, "and he's so funny. He makes me laugh and plays with my toys." I brushed it off as a cute phase, the innocence of childhood sparking again, but as the days went by, I began to notice shifts that sent chills down my spine. Emily would burst into fits of laughter one moment, then fall completely silent, her face draining of color as she stared into the corners of the room as if watching something move, something unseen. At first, I chalked it up to imagination, but when she began to insist that Sam could only play in the dark, my playful skepticism faded, replaced with a gnawing anxiety. I found myself lying awake some nights, ears straining for the sound of quiet thumps and whispers that seemed to weave through the walls, seeping through the cracks and corners of my home. One evening, I peeked into her room to check on her, only to catch her staring at the empty closet with wide, fearful eyes, trembling as she whispered, "Please don't, Sam," her voice barely above a whisper. My heart pounded in my chest. The little girl I knew as bright and brave seemed almost a shadow of herself when she talked about her friend. In another bout of bravery, I tried to engage her about Sam, to coax her into sharing more, hoping maybe, just maybe, it was just a child's game, but her words twisted into something far more sinister. "Sam says you shouldn't be here, Daddy. He doesn't like the light," she murmured, her gaze piercing into mine as if she were channeling a truth not meant for me. My rational mind grappled with the fear creeping into my soul. The childlike innocence was slipping away, replaced with something darker. Nights grew longer and colder, with more whispered warnings and frightened gasps. I began to notice my daughter would never play during the day anymore, always retreating to her room, where the shadows seemed to stretch like dark fingers reaching towards her, grasping her thoughts into chilling silence. As days turned to weeks, I noticed a change in my own dreams, nightmares filled with laughter, high-pitched and mocking, where shadows danced just out of my sight. I tried to speak with her about it, to find a way to banish this so-called friend, but Emily would simply shake her head, her large eyes filled with fear. "He's watching us, Daddy. He told me never to tell." Panic gripped my heart as I realized this was more than a child's imagination run amok. It felt like a living thing, a presence in my home that hungered for something I could not see. I worried over her, and every night when creeping shadows played across her walls, I would lay beside her, convincing myself that my presence alone could protect her. One night, during one of our frequent checks, I was suddenly compelled to look into the closet where Emily was convinced Sam spent his time. I threw the door open, light spilling into the darkened space, and what I found sent a shudder through my entire being. Nothing, and yet everything. The clothes hung limply, yet I felt the unmistakable sensation of eyes on me. Tugging at a coat, I felt a glimmer of hope, until a chilling whisper escaped the darkness, "You're not supposed to look in here." I recoiled, stumbling back, realizing with sheer dread that whatever this Sam was, it thrived on fear, and Emily's fear was fuel to its very existence. Desperate to restore peace to my home, I turned to a local therapist specializing in child psychology. Their advice was troubling and simple: create clear boundaries for imaginary friends. I went home, sitting Emily down and explaining that Sam was not welcome. She needed to tell him to leave. For a moment, I saw understanding flicker in her wide eyes, then, as though the air turned sludgy, she began to tremble, biting her lip as if she were withholding something crucial. "He told me what happens if I tell him to leave. You won't want to hear it." Whatever remained of my logical mind began to fracture at the seams. Terror pooled in the pit of my stomach. In the days that followed, Emily became a shell of herself, whispering into the darkness, responding to questions I could not hear. Her laughter dimmed. Sleep-deprived and desperately clinging to sanity, I decided if the therapist's advice had merit, perhaps an intervention was necessary. I gathered a small group of friends, parents who knew Emily, to stage a small gathering at our home. It felt shaky, a last-ditch effort, but I just hoped a sense of community would brighten the gloom that hung thick about us. The gathering began to feel like a celebration, and for a moment, I noticed Emily smile, but it promptly turned sour, her eyes dark with dread as she stared at the corner of the room. Panicking, I followed her gaze, my heart racing as I caught a fleeting shadow bouncing silently, shifting in a way that was wrong, something that could not exist, something that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Suddenly, Emily screamed, "Sam's here!" The laughter of my friends cut off mid-sentence, replaced with a horror-fueled silence. The air around us thickened, the shadows deepening, and I felt a rush of cold reality dawning upon me, as the lights flickered, the room seemingly folding into itself. I needed to act, to save her. Rushing towards her, I shouted, "You don't belong here. Leave my daughter alone." The laughter echoed again through the chaos now erupting, the darkness pulsating as if it had heard my thoughts. I felt a grip on my arm, my friends backing away, whispers and gasps filling the remnants of night. Then, just as swiftly, it was gone, swallowed by the shadows, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The flickering lights steadied, but the light had shifted, an unnatural hue bathing the room. Emily stood there, dark circles under her eyes, staring into the emptiness of the corner, and I clung to her, shaking, begging her to look at me, but all she could say was, "He won't let me go, Daddy." The realization crushed me. This wasn't a child's innocent creation anymore, it had roots, tendrils that snaked deeper into our reality, an entity that fed on her fear, on my fear. We left that night, abandoning our home, but the shadows followed us, and wherever we went, she would glance over her shoulder, her laughter replaced by an eerie whisper. Somewhere, in the darkness that consumed us, Sam remained, a conqueror of imagination, laughing softly as he drew closer and closer. The only choice I have left is to run until we're deep in the night, hoping beyond hope that we can outpace the shadows that watch and wait, but no matter where we go, I feel the weight of his presence because as Emily quietly confessed one night, "Daddy, I can still hear him."
I found a hidden letter from my late grandparent, it changed my life. I found a hidden letter from my late grandparent, it changed my life. It began on a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind of day that makes the world feel golden, when I found myself back at my grandparents' old house. My grandfather had passed away 6 months ago, and the house had sat untouched, frozen in time, while my family figured out what to do with it. That day, I had been tasked with clearing out his study, a room I had always been fascinated by as a child. It was a place filled with old books, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and a lingering scent of pipe tobacco. As I sorted through the dusty relics of a life well lived, I stumbled upon an antique writing desk tucked into the far corner of the room. The desk, with its ornate carvings and brass handles, had been my grandfather's pride and joy, but I had never once seen it open. Curiosity got the best of me, and I began searching for a way to unlock its mysteries. After fumbling for a while, I discovered a hidden latch underneath one of the drawers. With a satisfying click, the drawer slid open, revealing a pile of old letters wrapped in twine. My heart raced as I carefully unwrapped them, but it was the letter at the bottom of the stack that caught my attention. The envelope was marked with my name, written in my grandfather's unmistakable, looping handwriting. My hands trembled as I tore open the letter. It read, "To my dearest grandchild, if you are reading this, I am no longer there to share in your joys and sorrows, but there are things I must tell you, secrets that I could never share while I was alive." My eyes widened, and I read on, the letter unfolding a story that felt too strange to be real. My grandfather confessed that he had been part of a secret society, one dedicated to guarding an ancient artifact that held powers humanity was never meant to wield. This artifact, he claimed, had the ability to alter reality itself, and it had been hidden in our family's possession for generations. My first reaction was to laugh. It had to be some kind of elaborate joke, a posthumous prank from a man who loved riddles and stories. But the more I read, the more convinced I became that my grandfather believed every word he had written. He described how the artifact had been hidden in the very house I now stood in, and how its power had been the cause of inexplicable events throughout our family's history, the near-miraculous recoveries from illnesses, the strange bursts of luck, the eerie visions seen by those who had lived there. My grandfather had spent his life ensuring the artifact remained hidden, but he feared that his death would bring danger, that someone might come looking for it. He wrote that he had left clues throughout the house, a puzzle meant only for me, his beloved grandchild, to solve. "Find it, protect it," the letter ended. "And be careful, for you are not the only one searching." The air felt thick with tension as I folded the letter, my mind spinning with disbelief and excitement. I didn't know whether to dismiss the whole thing as the ramblings of a man with an overactive imagination or to take it seriously. My choice was made for me when, that very night, strange things began to happen. It started with the shadows. As I moved through the house, sorting more of my grandfather's belongings, I noticed them shifting in ways that defied logic. Once, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing in the hallway, only to find it empty when I rushed to check. I brushed it off as my imagination, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. Then, things began to move. A family portrait fell from the wall with a deafening crash, even though it had been securely hung. Doors creaked open and shut of their own accord, and the once comforting house began to feel like a labyrinth of secrets. Determined to see this through, I remembered the clues my grandfather had mentioned. The first one was hidden in his collection of old maps, a detail mentioned in the letter. I spent hours combing through the maps until I found a small, faded symbol that didn't belong. It led me to the fireplace, where I discovered a loose brick that concealed a tiny wooden box. Inside the box was another letter, this one even more cryptic. It spoke of a guardian who watched over the artifact, someone who would stop at nothing to ensure its power remained untouched. I shivered, the weight of the letter pressing on me like a physical force. I barely had time to process this when a loud bang echoed through the house. Heart pounding, I rushed to the source and found the back door wide open, swaying on its hinges. I was certain I had locked it. I closed and bolted it, but a chill ran down my spine. Was someone else here, searching for the artifact just as my grandfather had warned? The next clue was hidden in the attic, a place I had always dreaded going. Armed with a flashlight, I climbed the creaky stairs, every step making my pulse race. The attic was filled with old furniture and boxes covered in decades of dust. I nearly screamed when something scurried past my feet, but it was only a mouse. Taking a deep breath, I remembered my grandfather's instructions and began looking for anything out of place. Hours passed before I found it, an old trunk with a combination lock. The numbers were tied to the date of my grandparents' wedding, and when I entered them, the trunk popped open. Inside was a small, velvet-lined case and another letter. I opened the case to find a strange, metallic object that pulsed with an unnatural warmth. The artifact. It was real. But before I could examine it further, a sound like a whispering wind filled the attic, and I felt the hair on my neck stand up. I wasn't alone. Slowly turning around, I saw a shadow detach itself from the darkness. It was a man, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his face obscured by the gloom. His voice was low and almost gentle. "I've been waiting for you," he said. My breath caught in my throat, and I clutched the artifact to my chest. He stepped closer, and I could see his eyes now, pale and unblinking. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," he whispered. I didn't know where the courage came from, but I managed to say, "It belongs to my family. I won't let you take it." The man's expression didn't change, but I could feel the pressure of his presence growing, a suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. Just as I thought I couldn't withstand it any longer, the artifact in my hands began to glow, a brilliant light that chased away the shadows. The man recoiled, his form flickering like a flame in the wind. He vanished, leaving only the echo of his threat hanging in the air. Shaken, I stumbled down from the attic, clutching the artifact and the letters. My grandfather had been right. This was more than just a family secret, it was a legacy, a responsibility. And I knew that my life would never be the same again. I had no idea what dangers still lurked, but one thing was certain: I would honor my grandfather's wishes, protect the artifact, and uncover the truth about the guardian who had almost claimed it. The house felt alive with secrets, and I realized that my journey was just beginning. The moment I knew I had to change my life, my awakening. The moment I knew I had to change my life wasn't one of those gradual realizations that build over time. It was like getting hit by a freight train of clarity, a single instant that shattered the glass of denial I'd been hiding behind. It was late one evening, and I was sitting in my cluttered apartment, the kind of mess that had become so familiar I stopped noticing it. Pizza boxes stacked in the corner, unwashed dishes filling the sink, a faint smell of something I couldn't quite place but knew wasn't pleasant. My laptop was balanced precariously on my knees, glowing with the pale blue light of yet another mindless binge-watching session. I wasn't even paying attention to the show. My phone buzzed beside me, and for a moment, I ignored it. I wasn't in the mood to talk to anyone. But then it buzzed again, and something in me compelled me to glance at the screen. It was a notification for an event I'd completely forgotten about, a reunion for my college friends, a group I hadn't seen in years. The picture attached to the invite was a candid shot of us from our senior year. We looked so young, so full of life, laughing together on the quad with the sun setting behind us. I stared at the photo, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't recognize myself anymore. The person in the picture had bright eyes, a genuine smile, a spark of something I couldn't even name. The person sitting on that couch, staring at the screen, was a shadow of that. I hadn't just let myself go physically, I'd let everything go. My dreams, my ambitions, even my connections to the people who once mattered most. It was like waking up from a deep sleep and realizing you'd been sleepwalking through your life for years. I started scrolling through old photos, unable to stop myself, and with every picture, the weight in my chest grew heavier. There I was, climbing a mountain during a spring break trip, arms outstretched as if I could touch the sky. There I was, at a karaoke bar, belting out a song terribly but confidently, with my friends cheering me on. There I was, at graduation, clutching my diploma with tears in my eyes, ready to take on the world. What had happened to that person? The answer wasn't hard to find. Somewhere along the way, I'd started choosing the easy path, the path of least resistance. I'd taken a job I didn't love because it paid the bills. I'd stopped reaching out to friends because it was easier to stay in and avoid the effort. I'd let my hobbies and passions collect dust because there was always tomorrow to pick them back up, except tomorrow never came. The realization was suffocating. I felt like I was drowning in the life I'd created, a life that wasn't really living. The worst part was knowing that no one had done this to me. I couldn't blame anyone else. I had chosen this, step by step, day by day, until I'd ended up in a place I hated. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I grabbed a notebook from the pile of clutter on my coffee table and started writing. At first, it was just a stream of consciousness, messy and chaotic, but then it started to take shape. I wrote down everything I hated about my current life, the job that drained me, the loneliness that clung to me like a second skin, the sense of purposelessness that had taken root in my soul. But then I flipped to a new page and started writing down what I wanted. Not the vague, abstract dreams of happiness or success, but concrete, tangible things. I wanted to reconnect with my friends. I wanted to feel healthy and strong again. I wanted to wake up in the morning excited about something, anything. The more I wrote, the clearer it became. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. The next day, I called out of work. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew I couldn't keep going through the motions. I spent the day cleaning my apartment, scrubbing away not just the physical mess but the emotional weight it represented. I deleted the fast food apps on my phone and made a grocery list of real, nourishing food. I texted the friend who had sent the reunion invite, apologizing for being out of touch and asking if they wanted to grab coffee before the event. It was terrifying, reaching out after so much time, but their enthusiastic response melted some of the fear away. Over the next few weeks, I kept making small changes. I started going for walks after work, just to get out of the apartment and clear my head. I dusted off my guitar, which had been sitting in the corner untouched for years, and began playing again, fumbling through chords until my fingers remembered what my mind had forgotten. I signed up for a class in something I'd always wanted to learn, photography. The first day, I was so nervous I almost didn't go, but I forced myself out the door, and by the end of the session, I felt a spark of that old excitement creeping back in. The reunion was the real test. I was terrified to see everyone, afraid they'd judge me for how far I'd fallen. But when I walked into the room and saw their faces light up, all that fear melted away. They didn't care that I wasn't where I thought I'd be by now. They were just happy to see me, to laugh and reminisce and catch up on the years we'd missed. By the end of the night, I felt like a part of myself had been restored, a piece of the puzzle I didn't even realize was missing. It wasn't easy, rebuilding my life. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the pull of my old habits felt almost too strong to resist. But every time I felt like slipping back, I thought about that photo, the one of me and my friends on the quad, and I remembered the person I used to be. She was still there, buried under years of neglect, but she wasn't gone. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like her again. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone I recognize, someone I'm proud of. It wasn't some grand, cinematic moment that changed everything. It was a series of small, deliberate choices, each one pulling me a little closer to the life I wanted. And it all started with that one night, that one moment of clarity, when I knew I had to change my life.
I've lived in this small town my whole life, and I always thought I knew its quirks, like the old local library that looks like it belongs in a different century, with creaky wooden floors and a musty smell that clings to every corner. They say the town's history is written in that library's walls, but there's one part I had always overlooked, a door that seemed to soften around the edges, almost blending into the wall. It was only when I was rummaging through the dusty shelves searching for a novel to escape the mundane that I felt an odd pull towards that door. I pushed it open, and after glancing nervously around to ensure no one saw me, I stepped inside the dimly lit room. Shelves lined with ancient tomes stacked haphazardly towered above me, their spines cracked and faded, except for one particular book, its title embossed in glossy crimson letters that shimmered oddly in the weak light, Whispers in the Ink. Something about it felt hypnotic. I knew I shouldn't, but the craving for a good story won over my better judgment. I pulled the book free, and dust motes danced in the air as I blew off the cover, revealing pages that whispered secrets the moment I opened it, almost as if the book itself were alive, breathing in the stories it contained. As I dove in, the first words wrapped around me like a thick fog, molding my reality, blurring the lines between the characters' fears and my own. Hours slipped by, the outside world fading until a single phrase made my heart lurch. The ink was a poison that binds the reader to its tale. I attempted to close the book, but my fingers felt glued to the pages. The letters pulse with an intoxicating rhythm, each word heralding a new chapter, trapping me in a vicious cycle of intrigue. My heart raced as night fell outside the window, the shadows creeping further into the stacks, and I knew I had to stop, but the stories plotted within that cursed book became a dark obsession. I could almost hear whispers, echoes of the tales woven into its very fabric, warning me, mocking me, pleading with me not to read on. But something about the way the words glimmered in the darkness made it impossible to resist, propelling me deeper into the book's twisted narrative. There were characters, trapped souls that spoke to me, recounting their misfortunes with eyes that begged for release, each tale darker than the last. I should have run, but the curiosity gnawed at me like a feral beast. I wanted to help them, to understand their plight. Every night blurred into the next as I lost track of time, my life dissolving outside the prison of pages. I began glimpsing their worlds, the scents and colors wrapping around me like a shroud, until one night, deep into the madness of the stories, the boundaries of reality weakened, and I found myself standing in an alley that felt eerily familiar, the air thick with despair as the characters I had come to know glared at me with hollow eyes that whispered my name. "Why are you here?" one asked, voice cracking like dry leaves. "You should have never opened that book." Panic seized me, and I realized the ink was more than just words. It was a pulsating entity that had been using me as a vessel to relive its stories. I stumbled back, horrified, but just then, the air shimmered, reality rippling around me, and I was pulled into another tale, trapped in an existence that wasn't mine, surrounded by faces twisted with anguish, each one pleading for me to understand their unfinished stories. I fought to break free, clawing at the edges of the narrative, but the ink, dark and desperate, grasped hold of my mind and my soul until I could no longer tell where I ended and they began. Days turned into nights as I felt the weight of their existence warping my very being, the unrelenting despair devouring my essence, while the whispers became screams that echoed through the depths of my mind. I could see the shadows moving closer, the forgotten faces emerging from the corners of each vignette, each one a warning etched in splintered desperation. I had become a part of their suffering, a reluctant character doomed to relive the fates they were trying to escape. With every page I turned, reality slipped further away, until finally, I understood. I was now a guardian of their secrets, bound to the ink that forged the prison of their tales. I dropped the book, my heart a mess of dread and disbelief as it slammed shut, shaking the very library to its core. But it wasn't just a tale, it was real, and though I was free from its grip for a fleeting moment, I could hear them still, whispering wordless prayers. As the realization hit me like a punch to the gut, I had to warn others. I sprinted for the door to the secret section, my breath coming in sharp gasps, but as I turned the handle, it wouldn't budge, the heavy wood resisting my attempts to escape. Behind me, I felt the weight of their despair pooling into the silence, thickening the air as I turned back to see the book now lying ominously open, its pages fluttering wildly as if possessed by something dark and ancient. "Don't let us fade," they screamed, eyes piercing my soul, and I knew deep down that I had made a mistake, the mistake of stepping through time's delicate fabric, and if I couldn't shut the door, I'd be forced back into the ink. Then, in a last desperate grasp, I slammed the book closed, knowing what I had to do. I was not ready to become a ghost like the others. I had to burn it, but even as I rushed, I felt their shadows clawing at my sanity, their final fate intertwining with my own. Rushing to the hallway, I could hear footsteps echoing in the distance, the librarian approaching, and in that moment, I understood. The library had a secret, and I had made a grave mistake in opening that door. It was just a book. Or was it?
When I learned to trust myself, a journey of self-discovery began on a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the wind whispers secrets through the trees and the sun hangs low, casting long shadows that stretch across the ground like uninvited guests. I had always been the kind of person who relied on others for validation. Whether it was my work, relationships, or even the simplest decisions, what to wear, what to eat, I found myself looking to those around me, often ignoring my own instincts. But that chilly night, while sitting on the worn black leather sofa in my tiny apartment, I felt a strange pull to venture into the woods behind my home. You see, I had always been drawn to nature, but I had a tight leash on my adventurous spirit, constantly fearing what could go wrong. However, something felt different this time. An invisible thread seemed to connect my heart with the darkening woods. I put on my jacket and stepped outside, the fresh air filling my lungs with an intoxicating sense of freedom. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a reminder from my best friend to join them for a movie night, but I silenced it. I needed to do this for myself. As I crossed the threshold into the thick tree line, the world behind me faded into a distant hum. The forest enveloped me in silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. Deep down, a voice whispered for me to turn back, but stubbornness fueled my steps. I wandered deeper into the woods, allowing the cacophony of my thoughts to quiet with each passing moment. It wasn't long before the sunlight surrendered to dusk, and the amber glow faded into shadows. I felt a prickling sense of unease creeping over me, but I pressed on, determined to find this elusive clarity I had sought for so long. That's when I stumbled upon it, a clearing that opened up before me like a secret passageway. In the center was an ancient oak tree, gnarled and ancient, its roots sprawling like fingers clawing into the earth. I walked closer, entranced by its majesty, the bark rough beneath my fingertips. As I leaned against the tree, I suddenly felt a jolt of energy course through me, a feeling that I had completely forgotten existed, a sense of reassurance that whispered I was exactly where I needed to be. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to listen to the forest, the rustling leaves speaking in calming tones. Suddenly, I heard a voice, a low tremor that seemed to resonate from the very heart of the tree. My eyes flew open, but there was nothing there, just the darkening sky and the trunk of the oak before me. I shook my head, convincing myself it was nothing. Then I heard it again, clearer this time, trust yourself. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. Had I really just heard that? I was terrified yet exhilarated. The voice repeated itself, this time louder and more insistent, you can trust yourself. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, but something new, a flicker of defiance I hadn't felt before, told me to stay. I couldn't fight it any longer. I dropped to the forest floor and surrendered to the moment. What do you want from me? I cried into the silence. The night air was heavy, and I fought to maintain composure. The voice answered once more, echoing through my thoughts, urging me to reflect. Don't you see? You've been fed lies, allowed doubt to overshadow your intuition. Silent your fears, they are not truths. As strange as it seemed, I could feel the weight of those words settling in my chest, unraveling knots that had formed over years of insecurity. The darkness around me deepened, but a soft luminous glow began to pulse from the tree, illuminating the clearing. I could see shapes flickering at the edges of my vision, shadows that appeared almost human yet entirely intangible. My heart raced, but instead of fleeing in terror, I felt compelled to engage. Who are you? I yelled into the night. The shadows seemed to sway in response, circling around the ancient oak. We are the parts of you that you have forgotten, they whispered in unison, their voices a harmonic blend that resonated deep in my soul. We are your courage, your dreams, and your intuition. You can call us your guides, if you wish. The realization struck me like a lightning bolt. I had buried my own desires and absent-mindedly tossed aside my self-worth in exchange for fleeting acceptance. The fear of rejection had governed my life, keeping me complacent. But in this clearing, amidst the shadows and the ancient tree, I felt the walls around my heart begin to crumble. But how? How do I trust myself? I stammered, desperation slipping through my voice. Listen, they whispered, drawing closer. You must learn to hear the truth amid the noise of others' opinions. You must listen to your heart, it knows the path to take. In that moment, the ethereal figures spread their shadowy arms wide, inviting me to embrace the unknown. I took a step forward, closing my eyes once more. The energy in the air shifted, warm and electric, enveloping me like a cocoon. I breathed deeply, allowing their voices to wash over me. Feel what you feel, acknowledge your fears, but do not let them rule you. You are not alone, they urged. As I stood there, the boundaries between myself and the shadows blurred, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection wash over me. They were my fears and my dreams, my past failures intertwined with my future hopes. I understood then that I didn't need to silence their whispers, I needed to integrate them. With a newfound sense of clarity, I opened my eyes and looked around the clearing. The tree, the shadows, they all pulsed with energy, vibrant and alive. It dawned on me that the journey of self-discovery was not a straight path but a winding road filled with peaks and valleys, joy and fear. That was how I learned to trust myself, by embracing all the parts of my being. The shadows began to fade, but as they left, they carried with them my fears, transforming them into renewed strength. I knew I had come to the woods uncertain, but I was leaving with a boundless sense of self-acceptance. As I retraced my steps back through the trees, the world felt different, more vivid, the colors around me brighter, each sound sharper. I felt the earth beneath my feet as a solid foundation. I could finally trust myself to navigate through life's decisions with a guiding intuition. The experience was profound, one I'd cherish forever, but it marked only the beginning. I realized self-discovery is an ongoing journey. It requires patience and faith. Each step into the unknown is an opportunity to trust myself a little more. As I reached my apartment, the weight of external expectations felt lighter. I sat on my couch, reflecting on the night that changed everything and embraced the uncertainty ahead. It was time for me to write my own story. And as I settled back against the worn leather, I smiled, knowing I was finally ready to trust myself. I thought embracing my uniqueness would be a straightforward journey, a heartwarming tale of self-discovery. I opened the app, tapped the bright blue icon, and ended up writing my own kind of horror story. It started during a time when I felt like a stranger in my own skin. Growing up in a small town, I never really fit in. My classmates wore trendy clothes, played sports, and effortlessly navigated life while I hid in my oversized hoodies, doodling strange creatures in the margins of my notebooks. But I decided to embrace my oddities. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision following a humiliating encounter with the cheerleader squad. They had laughed at my drawings, calling them weird and silly. Standing in the cafeteria, my cheeks burned as they surrounded me, pointing and giggling. Instead of retreating into my usual bubble of insecurity, I felt a spark of defiance ignite within me. I realized, maybe it was time to celebrate what made me unique rather than hiding it. That weekend, I created something bold, a mural showcasing my creatures on the wall of the abandoned school near my house. My heart raced as I climbed the rickety ladder out of fear of being caught, but I was blinded by excitement. I splashed colors everywhere, letting the shapes come alive as I lost myself in the process. I had never felt more alive. As night fell, I stood back to admire my work, and in that moment, I felt like a warrior of my own identity. But then, something shifted. I don't know if it was the light of the moon or the strange stillness of the air, but I sensed it. The shadows beneath the trees grew thicker. A sound, almost like a low hum, drifted toward me, vibrating through my bones. I turned sharply, expecting to see someone, maybe a passerby who had seen my antics. Instead, there was nothing. Just the trees, their branches whispering secrets. I shrugged it off and went home, my heart still racing. This was exhilarating after all. But as I lay in bed that night, sleep didn't come easily. I felt like eyes were watching me, a prickling sensation on my skin, but I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. The next day, I returned to the mural, ready to add more. People were starting to notice it, some snapped pictures, others offered compliments. But the more attention it received, the stronger that humming grew, an ominous siren creeping into the corners of my mind, fusing with my thoughts. Within a week, strange things began happening. My dreams twisted into bizarre landscapes, swirling with my drawings. I saw the creatures growl at me, becoming more vivid every night. Meanwhile, whispers echoed whenever I passed the mural, soft voices that seemed to say my name. My friends grew worried, urging me to step back from what I was creating, to tone down my extravagant self-expression. They'd send concerned messages, but I brushed them off. How could I turn away from something that felt so right? Then one night, as I was sketching alone, the humming crescendoed into a piercing wail. I was startled from my trance, staring at the wall as if expecting it to answer me. I heard a soft rustle outside, like something, or someone, was moving between the trees. My heart thundered as I stepped outside, with the air thick. I called out, but the darkness swallowed my voice. Then, a figure emerged, cloaked in shadow, barely illuminated by the dim moonlight. "You called me," it murmured, eyes gleaming like shards of glass. I couldn't tell who or what it was, but fear was swiftly eclipsed by curiosity. "What are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I am what you've created. I am the sum of what you've celebrated in yourself," it replied, its voice a haunting melody. I was paralyzed, caught between fear and wonder, grappling with my emotions. "But I just wanted to express myself," I blurted. "But the world is not kind to things it cannot understand," it whispered, inching closer, "and you have begun to unwrap layers of your existence that most would bury. You must accept the consequences." With that, it turned, vanishing into the shadows, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. I returned to my mural, staring at it with newfound doubt, horrified at the sudden weight it bore. Over the next few days, I wrestled with my feelings. The whispers grew louder, and the creatures began to twist into darker forms in my dreams, taunting me with the weight of my past decisions. They weren't simply a whimsical representation of my imagination anymore, they were shadows of my insecurities, coming to life and threatening to consume me. One evening, my friends dragged me out to a party. I felt nothing but dread. I stood in the corner, watching others laugh and dance, while I remained anchored to my own thoughts. As the music thumped around me, I spotted a flash of color in the corner of my eye. I spun around to see my mural's features transforming on the wall by the entrance, possible duplicates, and excitement mixed with anxiety gripped me. With a determined heart, I rushed outside to confront the creature once more. It did not come. Instead, I faced the mirror of my uniqueness, my own reflection twisted by misinterpretation and fear of judgment that had been suffocating beneath the surface. I understood. My need for validation was driving me to the brink of madness. It was okay to embrace my uniqueness, but I had to do it for myself, not for the world. I returned to the mural one last time. Instead of hiding within the shadows, I grabbed the brightest colors I could find and painted over the darkness that had taken over. This was a journey, I realized, not merely a celebration but an acceptance. As the sunlight broke the horizon, I stood back and admired the newly vibrant mural, an evolution of everything I had felt about myself, reformed into something beautiful and empowering. At that moment, I felt liberated. The whispers faded to sweet nothings, the shadows receded. I stood tall, understanding the fine line between celebration and obsession. I could embrace my uniqueness, and as I did, the fear lost its grip. Instead of a horror story, I had written my own celebration of self, a narrative of growth, acceptance, and resilience amid the chaos of a world that often feels stifling. I went home, knowing I was uniquely me, honored and acknowledged, and finally ready to face whatever might come next without fear, only joy. It was a day like any other when I stumbled across an old, dusty box in the attic of my grandmother's house. The sun had barely peeked through the clouds as I rummaged through the forgotten relics of a time long past, and the scent of faded memories hung heavy in the air. My fingers brushed against worn leather, and I gently pried open the creaking lid. Inside lay a treasure trove of art supplies, collected sketches intertwined with charcoal smudges, half-used watercolor palettes, and a thick, empty sketchbook with the inscription "For the bold and the brave." It intrigued me. I had never considered myself an artist, and the last time I had held a paintbrush was back in elementary school, and that was only because I had no choice during art class. But something about that sketchbook called out to me, whispering promises of creativity and expression that my soul desperately craved. In that moment, I decided to take it home, convinced it would sit in a corner for eternity. But later that night, as the rain tapped lightly against my window and the wind howled outside, I felt restless and unable to sleep. The storm outside seemed to awaken something deep within me, a fiery spark that nudged at my consciousness. So, I grabbed the sketchbook, picked up a pencil, and began to draw. Initially, it was an awkward attempt, just simple shapes and lines trying to form into recognizable figures, but as the minutes turned into hours, something magical began to unfold. The pencil glided effortlessly across the pages, and I found myself lost in a state of flow that felt utterly intoxicating. I wasn't just drawing, I was wielding the power of a gateway into my innermost thoughts, my dreams, and even my hidden fears. An hour passed, and my once empty page was filled with swirling images of a vibrant, surreal world that existed only in my mind. Shapes came alive with color as I finally dipped my brush into the paint, layering blues and greens like the sea merging into shades of sunset. It felt like I was channeling an ancient force, one that had been dormant for far too long. The joy of creation engulfed me as I marveled at what I was able to manifest on that empty canvas. But as I continued painting, I started to feel something shifting in the room, an electric tension in the air. I shrugged it off as paranoia brought on by lack of sleep. Still, when I finished my second painting, a fiery red figure burst forth from the vibrant blue of my earlier vision. Its gaze seemed to pierce through me, chilling my spine. I paused for a moment, heart racing, but I felt compelled to keep going. It was exhilarating, like tasting forbidden fruit, and I poured more of my energy onto the canvas, unafraid of what might happen next. Night turned into dawn, and the light streaming through the window caught sight of everything I had created. I was filled with an indescribable euphoria. It was a bliss I had never known before. But in the middle of my celebration, I glanced in the mirror, across the room and froze. My reflection was distorted, almost too vibrant, like a painting ripped from a canvas, staring back at me with exaggerated colors and overly expressive features. I backed away slowly, unable to look away, and to my horror, the figure from my painting seemed to shift and twist within the confines of my reflection. Adrenaline pumped through my veins. I turned away, desperately trying to convince myself that it was just a figment of my imagination, driven crazy by the late hour and too much paint. But the paintings all around me felt alive, breathing in a way I could never explain. I began to clean up, frantically shoving the supplies back into the box, when I noticed something peculiar, a small sketch hidden at the bottom of the box, tucked beneath the larger sheets. I pulled it out, heart pounding, and stared at the image before me. It portrayed a figure, eerily similar to the one I had painted, but there was a void where its eyes should be, a hollow darkness that seemed to beckon me. I flipped the sketch over and found words scrawled in the margins, "What you create craves emotion. Careful." Those words echoed in my mind, a serpent wrapping around my thoughts, squeezing tighter with every breath. My heart raced as the pounding of rain outside transformed into a symphony of ominous whispers in my ears. That night sparked an addiction in me, a desperate compulsion to create and to express everything I had buried inside. But as my skills improved, so too did the intensity of what I was bringing to life on canvas. The lines between reality and my grim, colorful creations began to blur. One night, drawn into the depths of my imagination, I painted a scene of chaos, a dark forest filled with twisted figures that distorted into shapes of terror. I let the wildness of my fears spill onto the canvas, fully releasing the pent-up emotions. But as I stepped back to admire my work, I felt a chill that sent waves of ice through my body. The trees painted on the canvas seemed to loom over me, stretching impossibly tall, and for a fleeting moment, I could have sworn I heard their whispers echoing back at me. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself lost in this unintended and dangerous spiral of expression. Each stroke revealed something darker, something that wove its way deeper into my psyche. I welcomed the fear and the excitement, it felt almost intoxicatingly liberating. But soon, I realized I had painted something deeply unsettling, a picture that was not my own, deeply rooted in sorrow, regret, and a deformed reflection of the world's pain surfacing through my art. I was creating a void that threatened to consume me. I woke one night to find my paintings scattered all over my bedroom, their colors swirling violently as though trying to escape the confines of the canvases. Panic seized me. Frantically, I tore through the room, desperate to collect everything that felt like it might unravel me. But beneath the scattered artwork, a massive, shadow-like figure was emerging, its long fingers stretching toward me from the depths of my sketchbook. The horror reflected what I had been too afraid to face, my own suppressed dread. I grabbed the sketchbook, trembling as the words from the margins replayed in my mind. I had unleashed something that craved emotion, an entity born from my own insecurities, drawn out by the very act of creation itself. I slammed the sketchbook shut, trapping the horror inside, but the whispers grew louder, drowning out my rational thoughts. It felt like I was surrounded by the chaos of my own creation, the very act that had once brought me joy now threatened my sanity. Heart racing, I decided that I had to rid myself of what I created, convinced it was the only way to reclaim my own soul. I gathered every piece of artwork, every brush, every splatter of paint, and threw them all into the fireplace. Flames licked hungrily at the canvas, and at that moment, I thought I heard a voice shriek from the burning inferno, a cacophony of anguish and wrath contingent upon the destruction of what I had birthed. I ran, feeling the heat touch my skin like the unwanted memories of joy turned sour, and just as the last piece of my artwork reduced to ashes, I felt an eerie calm wash over me. The whispers faded, replaced by the soothing sound of crackling fire. I took a moment to breathe, wondering if I had finally exorcised the demon that was my creativity. But as I turned to leave the room, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. It was too warm, too vibrant, unnaturally so. The figure was smiling back at me, its eyes void of anything but a hollow, swirling depth. A cold realization hit me, I hadn't exorcised anything at all. I had merely become the vessel of a darker creation. And as I stood there caught in the mirrored gaze, I understood the truth. There was joy in creative expression, yes, but it came with a price. From that day forward, I couldn't touch paint without feeling the creeping dread rise to the surface. I discovered the joy of creative expression, but it was entangled with something far more sinister. Each stroke of the pen, each color of paint, still called me, whispering promises of joy, but I was no longer sure I was the one holding the brush. And if you happen to find an old sketchbook of your own, take caution, for what you create can consume you.
When I moved into my new apartment on the outskirts of town, I was thrilled by the modern design and spacious layout, but it was the curious window in the living room that captivated me most. Unlike any I had ever seen, it faced a dense thicket of trees, their thick trunks and twisted branches blending together like a dark tapestry. But as I stared out one evening, I noticed something odd. Beyond the trees, there was an unsettling glimpse of what appeared to be another world, a stark, barren landscape shrouded in perpetual twilight, with jagged mountains silhouetted against a blood-red sky. And I could swear that even from this distance, I felt a chill creeping down my spine as if I were being watched, a sensation that gnawed at me late into the night until curiosity took hold. That's when I first saw her. She was a figure draped in tattered clothing, her face obscured by shadows, but I could see her eyes, dark, hollow voids that seemed to draw in the light, and as she lifted a hand and beckoned, I felt an inexplicable pull, all logic slipping away as I found myself completely captivated by her presence. Days turned into weeks, and I became obsessed with my window. Each night, I would sit for hours, watching her emerge from the murky darkness, her movements slow and haunting, an ethereal dance in a world that felt entirely removed from my own. Yet the more I watched, the heavier the air in my apartment grew, filled with a suffocating dread, especially when I noticed the growing shadows of gnarled trees creeping closer to the edge of my window, as though the other world was seeping into mine. Friends grew concerned when I spoke about her. They told me it was just my imagination, a figment of my boredom in an unfamiliar place, but how could they understand what it felt like to be drawn to her like iron to a magnet? So one night, consumed with longing and reckless bravery, I whispered to her, calling out into the depths of that shadowy world, and to my shock, she turned, her eyes locking onto mine. The air crackled with energy, and in that split second of contact, it was as if I could see into her suffering. She stood alone in a decaying expanse, endless and desolate, haunted by echoes of laughter that erupted into screams. That's when I started dreaming about her. Every night, the dreams were vivid and unnerving, filled with fragmented memories of my life morphing into hers, as if she were trying to share her anguish with me, a loneliness that clawed at my heartstrings, until one evening, I thought it clever to leave a message in the window, something like, "I see you," hoping to foster a connection. But the following night was different. Suddenly, her demeanor shifted and she began to smile, a slight curve of her lips that sent shivers racing down my spine, and then the connection solidified in a way too terrifying to comprehend. I awoke to find all the clocks in my apartment stopped, frozen at exactly 3:17 a.m., echoing a feeling of dread that clung to my skin like a damp cloth, and as I stumbled out of bed, I glanced at the window, realizing the trees had grown so close I could almost reach out and touch them. From that point, everybody around me seemed to change. Friends would laugh at my plight when I told them about the beautiful nightmare I was caught in, and they began to avoid me as if I were contagious. But I couldn't pull away from her. Every night she sang, her voice drifted through the glass, a ghostly melody that cradled me like an old nicked lullaby, inviting me into a dark intimacy that intoxicated my senses, forcing me to acknowledge a deep-rooted fascination with her world, even as a part of me screamed to let go, until one fateful evening when I woke up choking on despair, a sinister burden pressing down my chest as I rushed to the window, yearning to see her again. But this time, the window showed nothing but the black underbrush of the trees, no red sky, no silhouette, only oppressive blackness staring back at me as my heart raced with fear. I was losing her, I thought, and I couldn't accept that. I pressed my forehead against the glass, desperate for connection, and that's when I felt the wind shift, a cold breeze that wrapped around my skin, whispers rustling through the leaves as if the entire forest was trying to communicate. That's when the shadows began to twist and shift, forming a dark figure at the edge of my vision that sent me reeling back. Panic set in as I realized it wasn't her. This presence was something else entirely, something formless yet dauntingly tangible, and the entire room seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. The window trembled as the once innocuous trees now bore down on me, their roots writhing like snakes, clawing at the threshold of reality. I stumbled backward, heart racing, when I bumped into the table and knocked over a lamp, shattering the silence as chaos erupted. As I picked up the pieces, I dared to glance back at the window just in time to witness the horrifying truth. The figure from my dreams, dark, contorted, a twisted rendition of what she once was, drifting toward me with eyes wide and brimming with malice, and an insidious voice echoed in my mind, whispering dark truths of the world hidden beyond the glass, making me question everything I thought I understood. It seemed the window wasn't just a portal, but a prison, a gaping maw of despair trapping me in a cruel game, a choice between two worlds, each more terrifying than the last. In that moment, I realized I was not merely the observer but a participant, and with a sudden wave of determination, I grabbed my keys and raced toward the door, desperate to escape this nightmare. But as I reached for the handle, I froze. The whispers turned into piercing screams, no more songs or beckoning, just anguish conveyed through tortured wails that echoed in my head, filling the air with dread that tightened around me like a noose. The trees outside thrashed and writhed, dragging the figures with them, and I turned back to see her, no longer a sweet image of sorrow but a harbinger of despair stretching thin like a worn-out tapestry. I fled to the window, my breath shallow and frantic, prying it open with all my might. But as the cool air rushed in, I felt a hand grasp my wrist. The figure loomed closer, and in that moment, I realized the terrible truth. I was never meant to watch her, I was meant to join her, to forever become part of the dark lullabies sung in a world filled with shadows. As the window slammed shut, sealing my fate, I didn't vanish, but I was trapped, entangled in a cycle of watching and being watched. A new gaze turned toward the world through glass, the melodies keeping me company, while the walls of my apartment grew darker, and the trees outside flourished, slowly closing the distance, leaving behind a haunting message: I see you.
I never appreciated silence until I found myself in a cabin deep in the woods, isolated from the world for a weekend retreat. I'd always had a busy life, filled with the cacophony of urban noise, blaring horns, buzzing phones, the chatter of strangers. It's what I had grown accustomed to and what I thought I needed. But that weekend, I decided to unplug, to escape. At first, the silence felt unnerving. I arrived at the cabin just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees. Stepping inside, I was greeted by an unsettling stillness, the creaks of the old wooden frame echoing against the emptiness. I paced the living room, scrutinizing my surroundings, the rough-hewn furniture, the dust motes dancing in the fading light, the air thick with an odd sweetness of pine. A part of me expected the television to flicker to life or the radio to spring into sound, but there was only the quiet, so profound it swallowed my thoughts. I resolved to embrace it, thinking perhaps it would offer clarity. As the hours passed, darkness cloaked the woods outside, and I lit a fire in the stone fireplace, its crackling filling some of the void. I nestled into the worn couch with a book, hoping to drown out my discomfort. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on the pages, the silence was suffocating. My mind raced, replaying the stresses of my life, work deadlines, strained friendships, the relentless pressure to succeed. The more I wished for peace, the more my thoughts spiraled, each quiet moment becoming a question of self-worth. With each crack of the firewood, I noticed shadows flicker across the walls, twisted shapes that danced far too quickly to be real, conjuring images of vague fears from the darkest corners of my mind. I told myself it was just my imagination, a product of my unease. I stuffed my annoyance and turned the pages more vigorously, trying desperately to impose some semblance of normalcy. But no amount of distraction could hide the gnawing discomfort of the quiet. As the clock ticked into deep night, the steady rhythm of my breathing became like a countdown. It was as if silence itself was an entity, taking shape around me, watching, breathing. Sleep began to elude me as I imagined what lurked beyond the wooden walls. I moved to the window and pulled aside the heavy curtains, peering into the ink-black wilderness. The moon hung high, skeletal branches reaching toward it, mocking my fear. For an instant, I thought I caught a glimpse of movement. A flash of white darted between the trees, something alive but all too transient. "It's just a deer," I whispered to the stillness, half convincing myself. The night deepened and threatened to swallow the last flickers of my courage. I retreated back to the couch, pulling a blanket tightly around myself, trying to ward off a feeling that had settled like ice within my chest. Just as I was about to drift into a restless sleep, an unmistakable sound broke the silence. A low, guttural whisper, like a breeze rustling through leaves, but sharp and urgent. It sent a chill down my spine. I sat bolt upright, every muscle taut with tension. "Hello?" I called out into the void, my voice trembling against the silence. No response, just the crackle of the fire, the rhythmic pounding of my heart. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself it was the wind, or perhaps my overactive imagination, but deep within me something felt undeniably wrong. The whisper returned. Not words, more like a melody, low and haunting, pervasive and feminine. It called out like a siren, luring me deeper into the silence. I felt an inexplicable pull toward the very heart of the forest outside, the darkness as inviting as it was terrifying. My instincts screamed at me to stay inside, yet the urge grew. I had to step into the unknown for one brief moment of clarity. Slipping on my jacket, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, the wooden porch creaking underfoot. The air was crisp, slicing at my skin, and the woods felt alive, every rustle and crack echoing impossibly loud in the night. I shone the flashlight into the darkness and saw nothing, only the endless expanse of trees stretching in every direction. Then, I heard it again, the whisper, now clearer. Come to me. The sound seemed to shift, leading me down an unseen path, the beam of my flashlight flickering in and out until it finally fell on a clearing. In the center was a large stone, worn and ancient, encircled by skeletal trees that looked as if they were bowing toward it. I had never seen anything like it. I approached slowly, my pulse quickening as I immersed myself in the palpable silence, less a barrier now and more a sacred veil. As I reached out to touch the stone, the whispers crescendoed, swirling around me and wrapping my thoughts into a tight embrace. You are not alone. But in that moment, I felt the overwhelming pressure of lives that had once thrived here, an energy both chilling and exhilarating. I drew back. What do you want? I called into the abyss. The wind rustled, carrying the whispers, and I realized that silence was not simply the absence of sound but a voice, an echo of everything that had passed, joys, sorrows, longings, and losses. I stumbled back, more afraid than ever, but also awash with an unexplainable sense of belonging. I fled back to the cabin, shutting the door behind me as if sealing off the spectral whispers. I sat in the dark, contemplating the unearthly communion I had just experienced. The next morning, I awoke with the light seeping through the window, the silence now holding a different kind of weight. I had learned something vital, embraced something that terrified me. Silence wasn't just an empty void to fill, it was a space that invited reflection, vulnerability, and connection to the echoes of those who came before. How many stories had been lost in the noise of daily life? I took a deep breath and let the stillness settle within me. Like an old friend, recognizing that part of true appreciation was listening to the whispers of the past and allowing them to coexist with the present. Instead of squeezing an escape from the silence, I vowed to carry it with me. In the end, I left the cabin and returned to the world, forever changed, having learned to appreciate the hum of stillness woven through my life. I walked now with an awareness that silence was not merely the absence of sound, it was a reminder of everything that needed to be heard. I never expected to find strength in my darkest moment, but that's exactly what happened last winter. It all started when my parents decided to sell our family home. I was crushed. That place held all my memories, wrapped in the scent of fresh-baked cookies and the laughter of family gatherings. My parents saw it as a step forward, it would give us a fresh start, they said, but to me, it felt like the end of the world. And then came the news that turned my world upside down. My dad had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I still remember the way my mom looked when she told me, her face hollow, eyes red and swollen from crying. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and my heart felt heavy, sinking into a place I wouldn't dare to acknowledge. We had to move out of the house before the treatment began, as medical expenses were eating our savings. So there I was, an 18-year-old girl having to pack up my childhood, knowing it would be one of the last times I saw my dad looking so vibrant in that living room, the place where he'd told me stories of heroes who overcame impossible odds. I can't say I didn't go into a stupor. I hyper-focused on the mundane, shoving clothes and knickknacks into boxes, avoiding the emotional weight of the moment. Each box felt like a tomb for the memories they contained, a grave I didn't want to dig. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. We moved into a cramped apartment where every noise echoed, amplifying the separation from my old life. As my dad started his chemotherapy, I felt myself retreating deeper into isolation. The weight of my sadness was relentless. I stopped hanging out with friends and began binge-watching shows, trying to drown out reality. It was during one of these solitary nights that I stumbled upon something odd, an old diary of mine buried beneath cardboard. I hadn't touched it in years, but something compelled me to open it. As I flipped through the pages, I found a collection of stories I had written as a kid. They were tales of adventure, courage, and facing fears. I was amazed by the spirit I had then, and it sparked a fire deep inside me, a reminder of resilience. I knew I had a choice. I could wallow in despair, or I could channel this energy into something meaningful. That night, I decided to confront my fears head-on. Inspired by my younger self, I wrote a new story, this time using my dad as the main character, battling a shadowy monster that represented his illness. Each night, I added to it, pouring my heart into every word. It was therapeutic. I laughed and cried as I crafted this new narrative. My dad was my hero, and I knew he needed encouragement now more than ever. As the weeks turned into months, I began reading my story to him during chemo sessions. He listened intently, eyes sparkling with pride and laughter escaping his lips. Each chapter seemed to energize him, and I would watch the weariness fade from his face, if only for a moment. I could see that writing was not just saving me, it was healing him too. It became our ritual, a beacon of hope amidst the storm. We began to seek out joy in the littlest moments, like celebrating a good day of treatment with homemade pancakes or reminiscing about silly memories from my childhood. I could see my dad growing stronger, and it pushed me to focus on my own strength. But life is not always blissful, and just when I thought we had found our rhythm, we got devastating news. The doctors had recommended experimental treatment, which had an 80% chance of success, but it was risky and expensive. We could either pursue it or continue with the existing course, but only for a limited time. I could feel the walls closing in again. The fear of losing him was almost unbearable. In that moment, I realized I had to take charge, and that's when the real test of strength began. I started researching crowdfunding options, learned about grants, and sought out local businesses that supported medical cases. I mobilized friends and family, pouring every ounce of my energy into organizing a fundraising event. It felt surreal, but the community responded with a passion I never expected. A small food festival was born, and it attracted hundreds of people, all there to support my family. Through laughter and tears, we raised enough to cover the experimental treatment and beyond. When I presented the check to my dad, the tears streaming down his cheeks mirrored my own. That day, I felt a rush of empowerment I had never known before. I was no longer the scared little girl hiding in her room. I was a warrior, fighting for my family. Weeks later, we learned that the treatment was successful. I still remember the day my dad got the all clear. He embraced me tightly, murmuring words of love. It turned out that we didn't just fight through adversity, we thrived because of it. I had discovered strength, not just in myself, but in the connections forged during the struggle. I still write stories, now with a renewed purpose fueled by love and resilience. Adversity did not break me, it shaped me into someone who knows how to fight for what truly matters. And although life continues to throw challenges my way, I stand ready, fueled by the knowledge that I have survived, that I'm capable of greatness, even when the path seems consumed by darkness. So if there's one thing I can impart to anyone going through tough times, embrace the pain, channel it, and create something beautiful from the ashes of adversity. You might just find your strength in the most unexpected of places. My neighbor's secret life, I never expected this. My neighbor's secret life, I never expected this. From the moment I moved into the quiet suburb, my neighbor Joe was the last person I thought would ever become a point of intrigue. He was the picture of normality, middle-aged, graying hair, glasses that slipped down his nose, and a meticulously mowed lawn. His house was an immaculate, single-story, cookie-cutter suburban home with the classic white picket fence, and every morning at 7:30 sharp, he'd be out there watering his flowers with that same steady hand and blank expression. Over the months, we exchanged the typical small talk, occasional nods, and awkward neighborly smiles, but nothing beyond that. Joe seemed to live an ordinary, uneventful life, that is, until the night I heard the sounds. It was around midnight when I first noticed it, strange thuds coming from Joe's backyard, followed by what sounded like muffled voices. I told myself it was nothing, probably a raccoon or maybe Joe moving something heavy, but the sounds continued night after night. Curiosity ate at me. On the fifth night, I finally decided to peek through the gap in my curtains, catching a glimpse of Joe under the dim glow of his porch light. He was dragging something large and bulky across his backyard toward the shed. The figure looked human-sized, covered in what seemed like a thick black tarp. My heart pounded as I watched him struggle to get it through the shed door before disappearing inside. I didn't sleep that night, my mind spiraling with possibilities, trying to convince myself it was just an old rug or maybe some broken furniture, but deep down, I felt something was wrong. The next morning, I casually brought up the noise to Joe when I saw him outside, hoping he'd offer some mundane explanation, but he just smiled in that unsettlingly blank way and said, "Must be the wind." I brushed it off, trying to resume life as normal, but things only got stranger. Every night, around midnight, Joe would perform his ritual, dragging something new to the shed, sometimes covered in black tarp, other times in what looked like burlap sacks. I tried to convince myself he was just a quirky guy with weird habits, but then came the incident that pushed me over the edge. One night, unable to sleep, I stood by my bedroom window, watching his movements, when suddenly, his head jerked up. He looked directly at my window, like he knew I was there, even though I'd been standing in the dark. I quickly backed away, my heart racing, but the next morning, I found a handwritten note slipped under my door. "Some things are best left unseen." My hands shook as I read it. Was he threatening me? Warning me? I couldn't tell, but it sent a chill down my spine. I tried to avoid Joe after that, but every encounter felt heavier, his casual smiles masking something far more sinister. I considered calling the police, but I had no real evidence, just paranoia and a gut feeling. Then, one evening, I was walking past his house when I noticed something strange about his car. The trunk was slightly ajar, and from the gap, I could see a flash of what looked like dark stained fabric, and a heavy, metallic scent filled the air. I forced myself to keep walking, but every fiber of my being screamed that something was very, very wrong. Days passed, and I found myself obsessively watching his house. The shed became the center of my fixation. Why was he so secretive about it? Why only go there at night? Desperate for answers, I made a plan. Late one night, when the entire street was dark and silent, I snuck into his backyard, my pulse hammering in my ears. I crept toward the shed, trying the handle, but it was locked. Just as I was about to leave, I spotted a small, dusty window on the side. I peered through it, squinting to make out the shapes inside. My heart nearly stopped. The walls were covered in newspaper clippings, all detailing missing persons cases from the surrounding area, some dating back years. Pictures of smiling faces, red strings connecting them, and handwritten notes filled the space. And in the center of the shed was a chair, chains bolted to its arms and legs, stained with something dark. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat, my mind racing. I had to get out of there, to call the police, to do something. But just as I turned to leave, I froze. Joe was standing there, no more than a few feet away, his face illuminated by the dim moonlight. He didn't look surprised. In fact, he looked calm, as if he'd been expecting me all along. "Couldn't resist, could you?" he said, his voice as cold as ice. I stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, an apology, anything, but the words wouldn't come. He stepped closer, blocking my path to the gate, his eyes never leaving mine. "I warned you," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Panic surged through me as I tried to push past him, but his grip was like iron, his hands cold and unyielding. I don't remember exactly how I broke free, only that I found myself stumbling back to my house, locking every door and window behind me. I stayed up all night, waiting for the knock on the door, for the sound of him breaking in, but it never came. The next day, I went to the police, desperate to report what I'd seen, but without concrete evidence, they were reluctant to believe me. They agreed to do a welfare check, but when they returned, they told me the shed was empty, no chair, no clippings, nothing. They looked at me like I was crazy, like I'd made the whole thing up. I couldn't believe it. Joe had cleared everything out in the span of a few hours, leaving no trace behind. In the days that followed, Joe acted as though nothing had happened. He'd wave to me from his yard, that same eerie smile plastered on his face, his eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. I started avoiding my own house, spending nights at friends' places, jumping at every creak and shadow. The paranoia became unbearable. One day, a small package arrived at my doorstep with no return address. Inside was a single newspaper clipping, detailing a missing person case from the neighboring town. Scribbled on the edge was a note in Joe's handwriting: "Curiosity has consequences." I threw the clipping away, but the message was clear. He was watching me, and he knew he'd gotten away with it. I don't know what to do now, trapped in this silent battle, terrified of what he might do if I ever try to expose him.
It was a dreary Tuesday evening when I heard my phone buzz on the kitchen counter, the screen lighting up with my own name flashing as the caller ID, my own number, right there in bold digits, and I waited for the logical explanation to drown out the spiraling dread in my gut, convinced it was either a glitch or some twisted prank, but flaunting curiosity mixed with an acute sense of discomfort, I reluctantly picked up. "Hello?" I said hesitantly, the air in the room thickening around me as if something unseen had suddenly pressed against my chest, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence on the other end, a heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to stretch into infinity, and just as I was about to hang up, a faint voice broke through, whispering my name with an unsettling familiarity that sent chills racing down my spine. "David." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest because that voice was mine, or at least an unnaturally distorted version of it, coated with a layer of something sinister, something that made my stomach churn as I gripped the phone tighter, ready to snap it in half. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice wavering as I glanced at my reflection in the window, the faint outline of my face confirming I was completely alone, and the voice continued, a sickly sweet cadence that dripped with viscous malice. "You know who I am, David. I'm you, the real you." And at that moment, a flood of memories crashed into my consciousness, snippets of long-forgotten whispers, secrets shared in the dark, and shadows lurking just beyond the edges of my mind. "What do you want?" I stammered, panic clawing at my throat as I stumbled backward, the cold tile sending ripples of shock through me, but the voice erupted into a harsh laugh, a sound that echoed hauntingly in my ears. "I want you to listen, to really listen, but first, you need to understand. The world outside is not as it seems, and you've been blind to it for too long." Just then, I heard the sound of the front door creaking open, a noise foreign to my quiet home, my pulse racing as dread pooled in the pit of my stomach, and without thinking, I bolted to the living room, half expecting to find a stranger waiting, but there was nothing, only the stillness of my empty house and the faint thrum of my heartbeat echoing in my ears, and the voice continued, unperturbed by my frantic movements, weaving tales of invisible threads connecting the world outside to a darker reality I had never considered, a world filled with lurking figures masked by the fabric of our daily lives. A warning, it claimed, that I was not prepared to heed. "You think you live in safety, but you walk with shadows, David. You don't even know the danger you're in," it warned, and I was about to dismiss it as insane ramblings of a fractured psyche when a knock rattled the window beside me, a rhythmic tap that sent my heart into overdrive, a visceral reminder that somehow, the very fabric of my existence was fraying, and the voice, my voice, insisted, "They're coming for you, they've always been watching. You need to leave, David, right now." And against every rational thought screaming for me to hang up and ignore the madness, I felt a surge of urgency, an undeniable pull igniting my instincts as I sprinted for the front door, something in my gut screaming that I was being hunted. I swung it open, ready to be met by the chill of the night, but outside was just an endless stretch of darkness, the street lamp flickering ominously against the heavy fog cloaking my street like a predator's breath, and I felt another sudden knock against my home, louder this time, reverberating through the walls, and I turned back, confusion wrenching my insides as I questioned who would be there now, who would dare intrude into my life when it felt so bizarrely fractured. But as I glanced back at the still-lit screen of my phone, the voice returned, soothing yet chilling, urging me, "Do not open that door. They've found you. You have to change the game," and my blood ran cold as I recognized the fear underlying those words, the urgency of a split-second decision weighing down my conscience. The door trembled again, and in a fit of instinctual panic, I slammed it shut, locking it in place, my heart pounding as I backed away, breathless, staring at the door like it was a cursed artifact that would open to unleash chaos upon me. But the voice didn't relent, pressing me further into the abyss. "You have to confront them, David. They've been waiting for you, and I know how to help you." I breathed out shakily, the shadows lingering in the corners of my home growing menacing, and against my better judgment, I probed deeper. "Help me? What do you mean?" The request hung heavy in the air, before the voice replied with an eerie calmness that sent a fresh wave of shivers down my spine. "You must find your mirror. The only way to break their hold is to confront your reflection. They're pretending to be you already. That's why they called you." And as if summoned by those very words, the knock erupted again, this time followed by a voice that made my blood turn to ice, my mother, distorted and trembling. "David, let me in. It's me, I'm scared." But the voice on the phone hissed, "This isn't your mother, it's one of them." My hand hovered over the door handle, wavering against everything I knew, every fiber of my being warning me that the person outside would not be who they claimed, and as I backed away slowly, I caught a flicker of movement outside the window, a shadow creeping toward the darkness, and I felt the intense pull of fear, something primal thrumming deep inside me, the selfish urge to protect myself above all. "Don't you see?" The voice continued, "They've taken so much from you already, and you can turn it all back if you just trust me." And standing there, my heart pounding, the world outside melding with the grotesque idea of what was waiting on the other side, I realized that whatever this was, this conversation, this unraveling existence, it promised a truth so terrifying that maybe I'd prefer to live in ignorance. "The mirror, David," echoed through my mind, forcing my feet into a painful decision as I stumbled to the bathroom, heart racing against the agony of uncertainty, pushing the door ajar and flicking the light on, holding my breath as I faced the reflection staring back at me, just me. But the moment I reached to touch the mirror, the phone buzzed violently against the sink, my reflection grinning wickedly as I picked it up, my breath hitching, anticipating what was about to unfold, only to hear the voice finally admit with chilling clarity, "You won't escape, there was never a way out." The bathroom grew icy, and the last thing I saw before the world warped was my reflection reaching through the glass, nails extended like blades ready to drag me into oblivion, and in that final moment of clarity amid horror, I felt the chilling realization seep into my bones. Sometimes, the worst demons lie not in the shadows but standing right in front of us, blending within our own skin. My son told me about the man who visits him at night, and at first, I thought it was just a dream, the kind of whimsical tale spun by the fevered imagination of a child, but as the nights rolled by and his details grew sharper, more vivid, I began to question my skepticism, especially when he started describing the man with such unsettling precision. He said the man had a thin, elongated face, etched with deep lines that seemed to shift and ripple under the dull sheen of moonlight, and his eyes, oh, those eyes were a piercing silver, almost reflective, as if they could capture the very essence of every dream and nightmare that my son was struggling to understand. I brushed it off for weeks, dismissing it as mere childhood fantasies meant to scare me into a fitful sleep, until one night, my son, tears streaking down his cheeks, begged me not to leave him alone, not after he had seen the man again. The air thick with the scent of something dark and ancient, the sort of dread that seeped through the cracks of our home, twisting the warmth of our little sanctuary into something sinister. That night, I took a seat on the floor beside his bed, determined to fight off whatever phantoms dared enter our lives, listening intently while he described the man's visits, how he would sit at the foot of the bed, backlit by moonlight, whispering secrets that sent chills crawling up my spine. In my heart, I felt a tightening that warned me this was no ordinary occurrence, and when he carefully spoke of the man cradling a black box, holding it out like an offering yet never letting him touch it, I felt the icy grip of reality pressing down, a sense of wrongness wrapping around my chest like a noose. I asked him what was inside the box, but with every inquiry, my son's eyes widened in horror, and he cowered beneath his covers, his small voice shaking as he replied, "He said I can't have it, that it's not for me." Filled with parental instinct, I tightened my embrace around him that night, and sleep eluded me. I spent hours staring into the dim shadows of his room, imagining the sharper angles cast by the furniture as grotesque figures plotting just out of sight, convinced that I could fight off whatever was lurking there. By the end of the week, I noticed he was becoming more distant, his laughter replaced by quiet somberness, as if the magic of childhood had dimmed into something more sorrowful. His once carefree spirit was weighed down by the burden of knowledge I couldn't fathom. One fateful night, I finally snapped, tired of feeling helpless against the fever dreams my son had seemingly invited into our lives, so I decided to confront the specter head-on, flipping on the lights, searching every corner of the small room for any sign of the haunting figure my son described, but I found nothing, only the steady hum of the ceiling fan and the echoes of my son's uneven breaths. It wasn't until I heard a soft knock from my closet, 3 distinct raps, quiet yet insistent, that I felt my heart drop into my stomach. Suddenly, all the tales of the things that hide behind closed doors surged through my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into a realm far darker than I was prepared for. Gathering every ounce of courage, I opened the closet door, the hinges creaking like a warning, and what I found was unimaginable. A small, battered box identical to the one my son had described was nestled amid the piles of forgotten clothes, its lock slick with an oil I could only assume was left by something sinister, and as I peered closer, the faint remnants of whispers flitted through the air like moths, filling the space with a heavy presence. I gently touched the surface of the box, and in that instant, I felt a warmth travel up my arm, a burning sensation attached to an overwhelming urge to open it, though every instinct told me to run as far as I could. I was paralyzed, entranced, and just when I was about to pull the latch, I heard my son call out from behind me, his voice high-pitched and panicked, "Don't! Please don't. Spinning around, I saw him standing in the doorway, eyes wide with terror. Something primal ignited within me, urging me to protect him as I slammed the closet door shut, and I asked what he knew about the box, his response tumbling out in frantic whispers that spilled like marbles rolling onto a hard floor. He said it gives you things you wish for, but you have to give something back, and it's always something important. In that moment, a wave of clarity crashed over me. I knew that what I had discovered was no ordinary object but a conduit for something dark, something that didn't just grant wishes but demanded a cost that only a child could pay, and as the truth sank in, we both felt it, the air growing heavy and thick, like a storm unfurling on the horizon. The man was coming. We barricaded ourselves into his room, layered pillows against the door, and crouched together in silence, our breaths sinking, desperation mixing with fear. It wasn't long before I could hear noises, low murmurs that seemed to curl around the walls, a voice that was far too familiar yet blurred with an edge of malice, as if it twisted every syllable into something grotesque, taunting us both, a mocking lullaby that ached to invade our thoughts. I should have known, I realized through clenched teeth, as another knock came, stronger, resonating with an uncanny cadence, the cadence my son had described. We waited, suffering through what felt like hours, trembling against one another, until finally, just past dawn, the whispers stopped, and as daybreak cast a gentle light across the room, we rushed to the window. The man was gone, but as I peered out, the world seemed unchanged. Neighbors walked their dogs, children laughed in the street, but I knew that the darkness hadn't left, it was simply biding its time. Each night continued to weave a thicker web of tension. The man never returned, but my son now shielded his eyes during evenings, unnerved by the darkness outside, and then one morning, I woke to find his bed empty, the sheets cold, my heart racing with a primal fear that had taken roots in my stomach. When I stumbled down the hallway, desperate to find him, I noticed the sun was up yet shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, and there it was, the box, precisely where it had been, slightly ajar as if inviting me to peer within, and upon opening it, I discovered not gold or jewels or any child's wonder but a piece of paper, crumpled and torn, and when I unfurled it, I was met with my own frantic handwriting, a letter I didn't remember writing, scrawled with an urgency that chilled my soul. If you're reading this, you've already lost him. The man takes what is most precious. Do not open the box.
I can't believe I'm posting this, but I feel like I have to share. The past few months have been a whirlwind, and what started as a simple break from life ended up revealing things that weren't meant to be uncovered. It all began when I found myself overwhelmed by the everyday grind. I was weighed down by work, relationships, and expectations. So, I did what anyone would do when they hit rock bottom. I booked a cabin in the woods for a weekend getaway. The cabin was rustic, isolated, and nestled deep within a forest that seemed to have been untouched for centuries. I arrived late in the afternoon, sunlight trickling through the leaves, casting dancing shadows on the ground. The air was crisp and filled with the sweet scent of pine, and for the first time in months, I felt a flutter of hope. I unpacked my bags, set up a fire pit, and settled in for what I thought would be a peaceful, rejuvenating weekend. But as night fell, the atmosphere shifted. The once comforting sounds of nature transformed into something more sinister. The rustling of leaves became whispers, and each snap of a twig felt like an omen. I tried to shake off the unease as I sat by the fire, staring into the flames. My mind was racing with thoughts, and maybe I overreacted by isolating myself. But deep down, I felt that this trip would lead to something profound. I just had to weather a few odd occurrences. The first night passed in peculiar calm, but I woke in the middle of the night, drawn to a strange sound outside. It felt like a low hum, almost melodic, calling me into the woods. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped outside to follow the music. The deeper I went into the forest, the louder the sound became, almost enveloping me. I noticed a faint glow ahead, like moonlight illuminating something extraordinary. As I approached, I stumbled upon a group of what looked like old stones arranged in a circle, and in the center sat a shimmering figure, its translucent form flickering like the flames of my campfire. It was beautiful, and terrifying, with features too vague to describe but enchanting enough to keep me transfixed. The music resonated from it, a hauntingly beautiful tune that struck a chord deep within me. I thought about turning back, but something beckoned me forward, an instinct to understand what I was witnessing. In that moment, the figure looked up and met my gaze. It felt like 1,000 memories crashing into my mind. I was bombarded with images from my life, my childhood, lost friendships, missed opportunities, and things I thought I had forgotten. And then came the clarity, a sudden insight into my life choices and the reasons behind my dissatisfaction. It revealed how I had buried my creativity under the weight of societal expectations, how I conformed to the mold laid out for me without ever questioning whether it fit. I began to sob, overwhelmed by a tide of self-realization, but the figure lifted its hand, silencing my anguish. In a gentle, knowing motion, it began to shift the music, weaving it into a different melody, a hopeful one, full of possibility. It told me that clarity doesn't always bring comfort. Sometimes, it's a painful reminder of what we've sacrificed on the altar of normalcy. But within it lies a choice, a chance to redefine everything. As the night wore on, I was entranced by the figure's dance, as if it was guiding me through my past, my regrets, and my dreams. Hours felt like minutes. I knew the sun would rise soon, and I was clinging to the knowledge that I had tried to retreat from my life only to be shown what I truly wanted. When the first rays of dawn touched the treetops, the figure began to fade, and the moment slipped through my fingers like sand. I stumbled back to the cabin, shaken but filled with an electric energy. As the sun arched into the sky, I sat on the steps of the cabin, heart pounding, replaying every detail in my mind. I spent the rest of the day contemplating what I had learned. It wasn't just a mystical experience, it was a prompt to act. I had taken a break, yes, but more importantly, I had found the clarity I needed to reshape my life. That day, I made choices instead of succumbing to the routine. I picked up an old sketchbook and began to fill it, letting my imagination run wild. I reached out to friends I lost touch with, apologized for the silence, and made plans to meet. I enrolled in a pottery class, something I had always wanted to try. But something else lingered on the edges of my mind, a sense of responsibility. I had learned this gift for clarity came at a cost. As I returned to my everyday life, I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure I saw wasn't just a figment of my imagination. I had a sense that it was still out there, watching over me. I kept my eyes open for the extraordinary even as the days faded into a blur of routine again. Then came a dark twist. Within a week, I noticed subtle signs of something wrong. Friends would approach me, eyes wide with a terror I couldn't explain. Odd, mundane accidents began happening, lights flickered more frequently, whispers echoed in rooms I was alone in. At first, I brushed them off, thinking I was imagining things. But then I started hearing the music again, our little forest hymn, playing soft and sweet in the dead of night. It was as if that ghostly figure was calling me back, but for what purpose? Was it a warning, or a beckoning to remember the lessons I'd learned? My nights became filled with restless sleep and cold sweats, realizing I had opened a door to something I couldn't quite grasp. I dove deep into research, scouring the internet for folklore, local legends, trying to connect the dots. I learned that ancient spirits are known to carry messages to those in need, and that some people are graced in that way. But there was no hero's tale for those who ignored the signs. It warned that to take is to also give, and as I scrolled through warnings, I felt a weight in my chest. I worried I had taken too much. Then, one night while working late, I received a notification from a local news site. A family had gone missing just a few miles from my cabin, vanishing without a trace. My heart raced, and those whispers returned. What if the figure I encountered had led me to clarity but demanded balance in return? I began writing everything down, not just my experiences but a testament to anyone else seeking the peace of the woods. I shared it on forums, talked to friends, warned them there might be something else out there, lurking just past the veil of clarity. I still feel it watching sometimes. I can hear the hum when loneliness sets in. But I no longer fear it. I honor that experience and stay vigilant. I took a break and found clarity for sure, but I know now that any shift from the mundane carries risks. Whether it's balance or warnings, I don't know. All I can say is, if you seek clarity in the woods, be cautious. You might just find something that reshapes you, or worse, something that demands a price. So here I am, sharing this, hoping someone will read it and heed the warnings. There's magic out there, but it's accompanied by shadows, and not all of them are benevolent. Don't let the song of the woods enchant you without remembering to keep your own voice in the melody.
I'm a snuff film superstar, but I'm starting to worry about the attention I'm getting, and it all began with a simple video that I filmed on a dare to impress some friends, the laughter echoing in the dimly lit basement, the sound of the camera whirring to life as I sat on the edge of my seat like a coiled spring, ready to perform for their amusement, not knowing this fleeting moment would spiral into something beyond my control. The so-called challenge consisted of me confronting an old, dusty mannequin I had found at a thrift shop. Someone dared me to act as if it were an unsuspecting victim, pretending to strangle it while they filmed my over-the-top theatrics, the entire scene steeped in dark humor. I never thought it would end up on the dark corners of the internet, morphing into something grotesque. A week later, my phone buzzed incessantly, notifications flooding my screen, and my friends told me it was going viral, but I couldn't understand why because I had only been joking around, though I watched it and felt that unsettling knot in my stomach when the comments turned from playful jokes to sinister praise. People were enamored with my performance, laying claims that my comedic take was too realistic, and amidst all this attention, I started receiving messages from obscure accounts asking if I could do it for real. At first, I dismissed the inquiries as a twisted prank, but a part of me ignited with that dangerous thrill of being desired, wanted for something darker, something that felt intoxicating yet horrifying. Weeks went on, the followers surged as I leapt down this rabbit hole of dangerous fantasies, and to satisfy my craving for attention and thrill, I began filming more elaborate skits. I remained carefully balanced on a tightrope stitched with deception, but as the views skyrocketed, so did the chilling requests, and what I previously thought were harmless jokes morphed into demands for authenticity that gnawed at my sanity. Night after night, I'd receive notes slipped under my door, cryptic scrawls beckoning me closer to the edge, urging me to cross that moral line. They wanted me to capture real fear, real pain, echoing through my mind while I struggled to breathe, suffocating on the weight of their desires. I ignored the pleas for weeks, but the sound of my phone ringing had transformed from a simple notification to a grim reminder of my growing infamy, and then the DM from the account symbolizing the darkness I was already swimming in appeared, a chilling message adorning my screen that read, "We know where you live. We want you to show us how real it can be." And it hit me then that my life was no longer mine, but an alluring stage for those hungry wolves craving content spun from suffering, my initial thrill turning to gut-wrenching dread as I scrolled through more videos on forums taunting my name, websites where fans crafted narratives surrounding my supposed creativity. Soon, they spun their own theories about my character, speculating that I might even be involved in underground rings, and I felt like glass, fragile, teetering on a precipice. All it would take was one crooked push, and I would shatter completely. I disconnected my social media, blocked countless accounts threatening to expose me while I paced beneath the dim hum of my overhead light, a hermit wrapped in fear, but the darkness began creeping into my dreams, leaving me breathless as I witnessed my own demise play out in a surreal tableau where I was both the actor and the victim, their whispers slithering in my ear, drowning me in dread, and I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, realizing that running wouldn't save me, and this was far from over. One day, a knock on my door shattered the silence, and my heart raced as the gravity of that single sound echoed in my chest. There stood a figure draped in shadow, words strung across their lips that froze me in place. "We're here to give you a job upgrade," they said, their voice a raspy whisper that left a chill snaking down my spine. Desperation clawed at my heart, but morbid curiosity anchored my feet. I'd been waiting for someone to offer me the chance to take my performance to the next level, but deep down, I knew their invitation was woven with darkness. They wanted to turn me from a mere performer into a puppet snipped at every string until only the horror remained. I took a step back, trembling as visions of my so-called fans danced through my mind like fireflies, illuminating the horror encasing me, and I closed the door, heart thundering, praying it would be over, but the weight of their words, that promise of invincibility, bred a hunger I couldn't extinguish. Days turned into dusk, and soon I found myself staring at the screen, mind racing, justifying all the decisions that spiraled out from one stupid dare. How easy it had been to flirt with the dark side, but now it was stifling me, consuming every piece of happiness, no matter how hard I yearned to sever the ties as their demands morphed into my reality. I began crafting a new narrative, featuring masked figures surrounding me, the line between staged horror and reality increasingly blurred, my heartbeat syncopated with the pulse of the desperate throng scattered across chatrooms that thrived on the morbid, echoing their twisted adulation for pain, and soon enough, I became their addiction, every slip of my mask followed by wild cheers, the world outside dulling into an unrecognizable heap, drowning beneath their awaiting silence. Then, one fateful night, I set up my camera for what I foolishly glamorized as my final act, hoping against hope to check the pulse of the virtual audience that had become my lifeblood. The air captively crackled with an electric tension, and as the sun dipped and shadows invaded my space, I caught the glimpse of something I couldn't ignore, the flicker of movement behind the blinds. My heart dropped, drowning in an icy river of terror, but I continued to capture footage, portraying acting skills honed to grotesque perfection until a static sound halted my breath, a blip through my speakers, followed by a voice dripping with mockery, "Show us your true self," and before I could comprehend how it was possible, my heart lurched as dark figures poured into my home like ink, silencing me before I could scream. They were everywhere, their faces painted with maddened fervor, waiting to teeter that final moment of entertainment, the line between life and loss dissolving under the blaring lights, their cheers overshadowing the truth simmering beneath me. For the first time, I realized that I truly was the protagonist of a horrific snuff film, and this was the script they had been waiting for, the final set piece where I became their greatest performance, a star adrift in chaos, knowing there would be no curtain call, no applause, just the haunting echoes of the desires I'd accidentally unleashed.